our speaker tonight, Val Redhorse. To tell you a little bit about how I know her, it's an interesting story. I teach a course in American Indian Studies and Culture and Identity, and we use films and movies, among other things. And I came across a film called Naturally Native and immediately fell in love with it. And so I emailed the production company who put this film out, and I said, I really love your film. Can we maybe talk about it sometime? And Val, who owns the production company, wrote back to me personally, and we began a dialogue. And eventually it led to bringing her here, and I am so glad that we have been able to do that. She's a wonderful woman in so many ways. She's made some amazing films. So on one hand, she's a filmmaker. On the other, she's an investment banker. She's also a mother of 3, a wonderful wife devoted to her family and her husband, and has many, many passions that she's able to act upon in her life. Many issues she's passionate about. So she and her husband own 3 different companies, a film production company, an investment banking company, and an advertising company. And one of the things that most impresses me about Val's work in the finance world is that she has helped to gather somewhere around over $2 billion worth of capital for tribal projects. And that is no easy task, especially in the markets we're in right now. So she's been a wonderful facilitator between tribes and investment firms for partnering together to create new economic projects that ultimately benefit the tribe, which is great. So I won't talk too much longer. She has many more interesting stories than I could ever tell. So without much further ado, I will give you Val Redhorse.
Wow, I am impressed with this crowd. You guys are just beautiful people. I just want to say I am so impressed with your university. This is only my second time in Iowa. I live in Huntington Beach, California, and my first time in Iowa, which was in January a couple years ago, I got caught in a snow blizzard, did not know how to drive in snow, and it wasn't really pleasant. It was near Carter Lake. I was visiting a casino up there. And so this time, the weather has been fine. It rained a little, but that's fine. And the people, you are amazing, I have to say. I think we have better weather in California, but you definitely have nicer people. I have had a wonderful 24 hours since I arrived at Iowa State, and I have to thank Jen for inviting me out, and the American Indian Studies program, and the Women and Gender Studies, and all of the different groups that came together to sponsor my trip here. And over the last 24 hours, I've had the opportunity to meet with and talk to intimately several of the students in classes and in at meal times. And I really honestly believe that if our country is in the hands of youth like yours, we're going to be fine. So tonight, I want to take you on a journey. I don't believe in speeches or lectures, really. All I have to offer you is my life experiences. And I've had some crazy and wild ones, and I've had a wonderful time so far. And I just hope that I can share some of the stories with you about being sort of a multitasker and working in the various industries that I do, and which include, as the topic of the lecture implies, being involved very much in Native American tribal business, and being involved with film and finance and philanthropy, and being a mother and a family woman. But I don't have a textbook. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. What I have are sort of the stories from the journey, and I hope that I can share that with you. And I want it to be interactive. You'll see there are microphones in the back. So at the end of my presentation, we're going to leave room, and I encourage you to ask me questions. I told the students I was interacting with over the last 24 hours to ask me anything, and both the instructors and the students I took advantage of that. I got asked some very personal questions, which are fine. And I felt that, we had a good time together. So please, I encourage all of you, feel free at the end of the presentation to ask me anything you'd like. Before I get into my own personal story and my personal journey, if you would bear with me, because I know there are some Native people in the audience, and just bear with me, all of you, from my community. I always feel a little sense of need to maybe do what I call American Indian 101 for my presentation, just so that I have a basic understanding before I get into my story. And that's because I feel that there's a lot of misinformation out there about who we are. And I don't speak, first of all, for all American Indians. No one can do that. This is my personal journey. I am of Cherokee heritage. My father was born in Tahlequah, Oklahoma in 1889 and was a member of the Cherokee Nation. I'm what's called an urban Indian. I was not raised on the Cherokee territory. I was raised in California because he was brought out on a relocation program that the government implemented back in the 40s. I will use interchangeably the terms American Indian and Native American. Both are wrong. American Indian is what was used when Christopher Columbus was lost and thought he had hit India. So that right there is a misnomer. And I'm guessing most of you in the room are Native Americans. Technically, by textbook standards, if you're born in America, you would check the box as being a Native American as opposed to a foreign national. So given that they're both incorrect, we still use them. And I use them sort of interchangeably. So there is not really a political right way. I think when people ask me what's right, most tribes would prefer to be identified by their tribal identity. So I would be Cherokee or Apache if you were Apache, or but when you're using it to describe sort of the general community, I use both interchangeably. I've also found that when I talk about tribes and Native American issues, I'm very, very happy to hear that this particular fine institution and university does have a very strong American Indian Studies program that really focuses on contemporary American Indian issues, because so many programs I find across the country concentrate on more historical issues and culture and art, which is very important, but I find that there's a lack of basic understanding amongst our contemporary population of all ages about our current system of American Indian governance. So I'm just going to give you a couple of facts. There are approximately 562 federally recognized tribes, and what that means is they actually have a treaty relationship with our U.S. government, which provides them with sovereignty, which means they're under self-governance as a tribal nation, and they are independent. There are probably another 200 state-recognized tribes, which is a unique status. They don't benefit from federal programs. Many of them are applying for federal status, but for whatever reason, the states have chosen to recognize them, but the federal government has not. And then there are many, many unrecognized tribes that are also trying to gain recognition through a process that the Bureau of Indian Affairs has in place. It's very onerous and difficult, and some of us would like to see that changed, but the bottom line is one must be affiliated with, through an enrollment process, with one of the recognized tribes in America to truly call yourself American Indian or of American Indian heritage, which again, there's a lot of problems with that system, but it's a difficult, complicated system, and I'm going to end there with sort of the American History 101, but I just like to get that out so people kind of understand who we are in a contemporary setting. And as I get into my story and my journey leading up to, I work with tribes every single day. I think that will help as we maybe get into some more of the American Indian issues. I want to take you on the journey specifically about a film we're going to talk about, and the film that led me to be here, which is the one that Jen showed in her class. And that film is called Naturally Native. And the journey of that film really parallels the journey of my life. And the title of this lecture is Challenging the Status Quo. And I would submit that I didn't really challenge the status quo, but I challenged myself. I didn't pay attention to the status quo. I didn't even acknowledge it in Hollywood. I simply decided to embark on a journey. And they often say that necessity is the mother of invention, in which I agree, because what happened in my own journey, in my own life, was a series of closed doors. And that's sort of my theme for tonight. I'm going to talk about how I embrace, and I encourage everyone in the room to embrace the closed doors of your life, because from the closed doors, I have found amazing opportunity and alternate routes that have led to wonderful paths that I may not have chosen otherwise. So I'm going to start back when I was 13 years old. When I was 13, I was in middle school, and I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And we were having a drug problem in school, and so the school decided to bring in a series of lectures to discuss drugs, sort of like the Just Say No campaign of today. And they brought in, it was a week-long program, and they brought in first police officers and law enforcement officers who came in and gave lectures. And bless their hearts, they were very boring, no one paid attention, and in fact people were passing drugs at the back of the room. The next few days they had doctors talk about the evils of what drugs would do to you, and they passed out pamphlets, same sort of reaction. People were either sleeping or on drugs. The final day of the week of drug prevention, they brought in a film. And I believe the film was called Scared Straight. And they didn't even give it an introduction. They didn't need to. And I saw some kids actually be scared straight. It was pretty graphic, and it had the power to change lives. And I was not caught up in drug versus don't use drugs or any of that issue in particular. I got caught up in the film genre itself. And I, that moment, understood the power of the motion picture image and the message, and decided I wanted to be involved in that. And I didn't know what my particular message would be at that time. I was only 13, but I was very committed and decided that's the journey I wanted to take. So I went to UCLA because they had a great film department, majored in film and theater, had an amazing experience at UCLA because they did not recognize any sort of racial or gender boundaries. And I studied Shakespeare and Chekhov, and I played Asian roles and African American roles and Caucasian roles, and I thought that the industry was like that. And so I got out and got an agent and realized with sort of a rude awakening that Hollywood is very different, and Hollywood stereotypes you and tries to pigeonhole you. And with my last name, they only wanted me to audition for as an actress, because that was my original plan, just to be an actress. You know, Indian woman beating moccasins in back of TV. And that was what I got called for. And the final audition that really unsettled me was, keep in mind, I had recently graduated from UCLA, and I took my academics very seriously, and I had graduated with honors, and I had practically straight A's. Very proud of that fact. And I auditioned for this part, Indian woman beating moccasins in back of teepee. And the director, who was a lovely Caucasian male, I believe he had never set foot on a reservation, turned to me after the audition and said, "Oh, no, you sound way too educated to play a Native American woman." Well, it made me very angry, and it made me very frustrated. And so I went home, and I was married. By then, I married my college sweetheart. And my college sweetheart, my current husband, is a white Caucasian male football player, and I call him top of the food chain. He doesn't understand anything like persecution and racial prejudices, but it's good for me, because when I bounce things off of him, he gives me that complete, like, there's no glass ceiling perspective. And so I was complaining to him about this man telling me that I sounded too educated, and he simply turned to me. I think he had one eye on the football game, but he turns to me and he says, "Well, why don't you just write your own scripts then?" Back to the football game. And I don't know why it took him to tell me that, but he was absolutely right. And so I started writing my own scripts. And I have to kind of scrunch everything down so I don't keep you here all night. But, you know, it took a while for me to get one of my screenplays produced, but I finally did. And a big studio picked it up and produced one of my screenplays and completely changed it. And it was awful. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, so as an actress, I needed to write. And now as a writer, I guess I need to produce, because they took my screenplay and they completely changed it around. I had no control over what I had done. So then I started to produce, and I still saw things being moved around and changed with the stories I had written. And I wanted them to be true and accurate to my experience as a Native woman. And I wanted the portrayals to be honest and true for the audience. And so finally, I realized that I needed to direct. And so I decided to write a film that I could do all of the above, that I could write, direct, act in. And I wrote a screenplay and submitted it for a grant to actually get funded to produce. And I made it into the finals of this particular competition, which happened to be held in Minnesota. It was like an independent film project in Minnesota. Now, this screenplay that I wrote took place at an Indian gaming casino. I thought that would be kind of, Indian gaming was sort of new, and I thought that would be sort of quirky and interesting and funny and dramatic at the same time. So I had this screenplay, and I made it into the finals for this grant, and they told the 5 finalists to come prepared to discuss how you would make your film if you were given the grant money. Camera shot length, technical aspects, who you would hire for your crew, location scouting, all that sort of stuff. And keep in mind, I'm an academic at heart, so I had pages of preparation. Well, I got to the finals. I started walking in the room. Before I even got to my chair, the man in the middle says to me, "Aren't you dancing with the devil?" I literally looked behind my shoulder. I'm a Presbyterian mother of 2 at the time. I thought, well, who is he talking to? He proceeded, before I never got down to the chair, he proceeded to tell me that he thought my screenplay glamorized tribal gaming and that was the downfall of many a family, and that how could I possibly justify glamorizing something that was so evil? And I thought to myself, well, why would you select me into the finals then? But I kept trying to go back to my shot length and cameraman, and they did not want to hear anything I had prepared. They wanted to talk about Indian gaming. And when he finally said, right in my face, "Listen, I live in Arizona part-time, and I see men who should be supporting their families take their paycheck and they go and blow it at the casino, and then they can't feed their families. What do you have to say about that?" And he's in my face. So I put my papers down. I realize I'm not going to get this grant. And I say to him, "Do you really want to talk to me about feeding families? Do you have any idea what the federal government has done for 200 years in dropping the ball in economic development and growth and broken promises and broken treaties to our federal tribes? Do you have any idea? They can't feed themselves. And now we have one industry that has given us an economic engine, an economic base, and it doesn't even cover everything that we need. And you want to tell me that you think it's wrong because a few people abuse it." I walked out, didn't get the grant, got on the plane home and wrote the script, Naturally Native, out of all my frustrations, because there was just so much that had happened along this journey to try to make a film. And this was like the straw that broke the camel's back, to have someone challenge me on something that I felt he knew nothing about. And I'm not saying that gaming is right and that all of gambling is right and that it should be the only thing that we do, but he clearly had no understanding. But what I love about filmmaking, and again, here's where the closed door concept came in. I didn't get the grant to make that other screenplay, but I ended up writing a better one. I ended up writing one that got much more exposure, and I turned my anger and frustration into a creative energy. I wrote this screenplay on the airplane home. Of course, I had to tweak it a little bit after that. And then I went to pitch it in Hollywood, and I got such crazy responses. People said, "Well, this is a really good script, and, we might fund it if you'd put Cher in the lead." Well, Cher is 100% Armenian. She did do a song about Cherokee people, but I said, no, I don't think that's right. I got another production company from Germany that said if all the women were to do nude scenes, they would finance it. We said no thank you to that. I had a gay and lesbian production company say that if we changed it to a gay and lesbian film, they would finance it. Again, I said probably not possible with the screenplay that I had in mind. So it was a very difficult project to get made in Hollywood, and I just kept meeting all these closed doors. Well, I finally decided to go and pitch it to an Indian tribe. Now, I decided to create a business plan. I thought it was about $1 million film. And I thought, you know what, if I find 10 tribes to put in $100,000, that's kind of manageable. So I'm going to go pitch it to 10 different tribes. The year was 1997. Around that same time, I need to back up for you because it's sort of an interesting intersection of my careers. When I was in college and film school, I got a day job just working to make some extra money. Turned out the gentleman that I ended up working for was a person named Mike Milken. Most of you in the room are probably too young to know who he is. I can tell some of you recognize the name. Mike Milken is considered the high-yield bond inventor of the high-yield note on Wall Street. He did go to jail for insider trading. I was not involved with that. But I worked for him at Drexel Burnham Lambert from 1978 to 1985, just as a day job while I was in college. I graduated in 81, and I continued at Drexel. But I learned how to finance a casino. We financed all of Steve Wynn's casinos. We financed all of Las Vegas back in the day. And so in 1988, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act passed, allowing tribes their sovereign right to operate gaming on reservations. And I kind of looked upward and went, okay, so maybe there was a plan to that day job I had in college. But I was busy making films and having babies, and I had learned a lot, obviously working in one of the largest investment banks on Wall Street at the time, but hadn't really thought too much further about it. Well, if we then fast forward to where I'm at right now, I'm raising money for a film, and I get a call from some folks on Wall Street saying they think that I should come to Wall Street. There are some investors interested in me starting an investment bank, and that it would be the first female Native-owned investment bank focused on raising money for tribes, and that these particular investors were interested in investing. So I traveled out to the East Coast, and the first tribe I pitched was the Manshantucket Pequots. And then I went to Wall Street and pitched some investors on investing money to start the investment bank. And this was sort of mid-year 97, early 97, about April, May. In August of 97, I got 3 phone calls. The first call said that the Manshantucket Pequots loved my film idea, and instead of doing the $100,000 I was asking for, they wanted to do the whole film, and they wanted me to deliver it in time to make it for the consideration for the Sundance Film Festival, which meant it had to be finished by about October. Yeah, very fast turnaround. The second call I got was that the investors I had pitched on Wall Street loved the idea of the investment bank, wanted to invest the money, but I had to get 5 securities licenses in about 3 months. The third call I got was a surprise from my doctor, who said, remember that blood test we took when you weren't feeling very well? You're pregnant with your 3rd child. So 97 was an extremely busy year for me. Went forward with all 3 projects. And so yes, I was pregnant in the film. I was the lead actress as well. I now have a beautiful daughter, and we made the film, and we launched the investment bank. And it was amazing, though, because I would never have gotten to all of those places without several doors being shut in my face in Hollywood when I was originally trying to do all of my original ideas. And what I want to show for you right now, and Jen has so graciously agreed to be my assistant, because I can make movies, but I can't work the equipment that plays them. I'm just too old for that. She's going to show you the trailer for Naturally Native, which was funded entirely by the Manshantucket Pequot Tribal Nation and produced by my film company. And you're going to hear a song in this trailer, original music by Donna Summer. We had a great soundtrack, lots and lots of donations of music, Gloria Stefan and Native artists, and we employed 45% Native people behind the camera as well as in front of the camera on the crew. We had a mentorship program. It was an amazing experience. So this is Naturally Native.
What is that?
It's called a dream catcher, and they say that if you hang one over your bed, that all of the bad dreams will get caught in the web, and the good dreams will pass through the hole and to you.
You believe it?
I believe in dreams.
The Manshantucket Pequot Tribal Nation and Red Horse Native Productions present a film for anyone who's ever followed their dreams. Naturally Native, an unforgettable story of 3 sisters. Vicky, the inspiration.
Do you remember when I finally found our real dad? He taught me things from the earth. Lotion, shampoo, medicine, some really amazing stuff.
Karen, the business school graduate,
It's a great plan, but to start a business, I need a real product. Come on.
and Tanya, the youngest.
It tingles. Really? You can feel it tingle? Yeah, a lot. Woo!
Together, they share a new kind of American dream.
We only need $25,000 for our initial startup.
Have a garage sale, Vic's Closet.
Oh, that'll get us 25 cents.
But run into an age-old problem.
You see, it's American Indian remedies and formulas that have been passed down from our elders. It's the real American thing.
Normally, your proposal would be an easy one for us to fund.
What seems to be the problem here?
You are California Indians.
You are descendants of these two California tribes.
Yes, we are.
Both of these tribes operate casinos.
What does that have to do with your firm funding our cosmetics business?
It's your people and the damn casinos that caused the problem. I think this meeting is over.
Lewis, Big Hawk, those names aren't from our tribe. We have a successful casino now, so everybody's wanting to join the tribe.
The same dream that brought them together almost rips them apart.
I can't support the lot of us, not by myself.
We are trying to start a business. You told me I had to work twice as hard because I was Indian, and I did.
Join them and share their joys, passion, surprises,
Are you an Indian? I was in a previous life.
discover the power of the human spirit,
We can't give up on this. We're a family.
and see that you can go home again. Naturally Native, a movie for the dreamer in all of us.
So the interesting thing about Naturally Native, it was an independent film. It went to Sundance. It screened around the world, literally. And recently, a couple of years ago, we were the first Native American produced film that was picked up for a full Walmart distribution. So we've had an interesting ride, but my favorite story related to Naturally Native, I really want to stress this for all the students in the room contemplating careers in whatever sector you end up in. You have to think outside the box. Again, life is not always like you plan it, and sometimes your opportunities are not what they appear. So, as you saw in the trailer, when I wrote this screenplay, it really was about my journey starting a business, a film production company, but you don't want to make a film about a film company. So I created a literary device, we call it, in the fictional product of the cosmetics business. And the reason I did that is my daughter had done a science project where she compared commercial products to ancient native remedies and did some, wonderful little things in our sink. And she won, second place in the science fair. And it gave me the idea to, just as a literary device to propel us on this journey of starting a business, just create this cosmetic product of hair care and shampoo and skincare for the movie. So when this was shot on 35 millimeter film, which doesn't happen very often in independent film anymore. Now everything's on high def. But when you shoot on 35 millimeter film in Hollywood, you usually go through something like Deluxe Labs, and once they lock picture, that's it, because it's on actual cut film, and it's very, very expensive. And so before you lock picture on a film, you have test screenings just to make sure, do people laugh in the right place? Does it feel like the right length? Is the music the right mood? So we had 3 test screenings in and around Los Angeles, different age groups, native, non-native, old, young, just to try to see, what is your reaction to the film? Every single audience, bar none, did not want to talk to me about the creative film. Excuse me, where can we buy the product? It's a literary device. We don't sell the product. Can we get it at a health food store? No. We don't have the product, but we see the product in the film. Well, my husband, the football player, in the back row, elbows me finally and said, "Start the product." He's a man of few words, but he typically has some decent advice. And don't ever tell him I said that. But he encouraged me to start the product. Long story short, we started the product. We went to Indian tribes and talked to elders and actually did get ancient remedies and herbal formulas. I did a lot with the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash out in Santa Barbara with one of their women who is a medicine woman. It was an amazing experience. Long story short, we've made a lot more money on the product than the film. So think outside the box. You don't always know what direction a certain business plan is going to take you. We ended up on QVC, and at one point we sold, it was something like 22,000 units in 8 minutes. I mean, it's not about the money, it's just an interesting quirk that came out of the film. So we make the film, critically successful, it's great, it's a great experience. We get a call from a very big name producer in Hollywood. Her name is Gail Ann Hurd. She was married to Jim Cameron. Together they produced all the Terminator series, Aliens. She now is producing The Walking Dead, which is a zombie series that's doing phenomenally well. And her films have been nominated for Academy Awards and have grossed something like $4 billion. So I thought, why is she calling me? And she said she had seen Naturally Native, and she wanted to know if I wanted to produce a film with her about the Navajo Code Talkers. So I met with her, and she had optioned a fictional narrative screenplay about the Navajo Code Talkers who fought in World War II. And I said, Gail, I would love nothing more than to produce a film with you, but we really have to go talk to the Navajo. You can't just do a film about a tribe and not have their permission. And she goes, great, plan the trip. So I had just come off this film where we were on an extremely tight budget. So I got 2-for-1 tickets on Southwest, found a rental van that we then would pick up, I think, in Albuquerque and drive 3 hours to the Window Rock, where the Navajo Nation is located. We called her office and gave them the travel plans. They called back and said, is there an airstrip on the Navajo Nation? And so clearly, her office is on a little bit different budget than mine, and they had a private jet, and so we took the private jet out to the Navajo Nation. It was an unusual experience for me. I've since then have never flown to a reservation in a private jet. But we met with the Navajo Nation and the Code Talkers who were alive. Very interesting thing happened. A lot of them had seen Naturally Native, and of course they'd all seen Terminator and Aliens, and they embraced us very warmly. But they said, you know what, your film is like written by a white guy, and it's not our story. We want you to tell our story. And neither one of us had ever done a documentary. But she turned to me and said, we have to do the documentary. And so she basically threw the narrative feature screenplay in the trash. John Woo at MGM went ahead with a film called Windtalkers starring Nicolas Cage that was not well received because it did just what they did not want. It did not tell their story. We went ahead and told their story, and I learned so much from that experience. I have a feeling some of you, maybe in this section, are probably very familiar with World War II and the Navajo Code Talkers, and I appreciate you being here tonight because I learned a lot. I didn't know that much about their service, and I really was humbled. And I learned a lot as an individual and as a director. I learned that basically the Navajo Code Talkers had been put in boarding schools from they were living on the Navajo reservation in the 30s and the 40s. And as part of the agreement with the federal government to enter into treaties that granted tribes sovereignty in their own land and their own ability to govern themselves, one of the stipulations for many tribes was that you had to forcibly put your children into assimilation programs in boarding schools where they would be anglicized. So no speaking your native language, no practicing your culture. It was cultural genocide for all intents and purposes. But the price was high, but it was worth it for tribes because they needed their sovereignty and they needed their land. So what we learned was that the Navajo boys were put into the boarding schools and literally beaten if they spoke their native language. If a nun or a teacher heard them, they were put in basements, they were put in solitary confinement. Well, then we're now in World War II, and this is in the 40s, and in the Pacific Theater, the Japanese are breaking every one of our military codes. So someone gets the idea, well, let's use a little-known Indian language, and someone had grown up on the Navajo reservation, was the son of a minister, and said, yeah, let's go use the Navajo language. So the Marines implemented the idea of code talking. They now go into the boarding schools in an act of true irony, take the boys who have been beaten for speaking their language and say, we basically want you to come help our military win World War II by speaking your language. And they agreed to. Very, very proud men, and very, very proud and happy to serve their country. So they create a code with their language. They go short in the war. It's absolutely documented that they helped on Iwo Jima and were able to end the war sooner than it would have ended. And they come home and get no benefits, no recognition, no medals. I was livid when I found out this story. And I came at it as a director with a lot of anger. And, it was creative anger, but I wanted to do almost an expose of the military and the federal government and the treatment of our native soldiers. And I really had this attitude, I guess, in my angle. And I sat the men down to interview them, and keep in mind, they're in their 80s and 90s at this point. And I'm kind of going through my questions, and you could tell where I was getting at. And they were very stern with me, and they said, Miss Redhorse, no, we're not angry. We would put on that uniform again, and we would fight for this country again. And I tear up every time I think of it. I apologize. But you know what? I have not seen that level of dedication and commitment by people who were not even citizens, who were not granted the rights of our Constitution, did not get benefits anywhere. And I was so humbled. And so I completely changed my direction as a director and a filmmaker and let them tell their story. And what's interesting is when you see the Navajo Code Talkers story that we did, it ended up on PBS and also showed around the world. It comes out so much stronger, so much more poignantly, because I'm not hitting you over the head, but when you see how brave and proud they were, and they're not complaining, but you still understand that they didn't get recognition or pensions, somehow that is even a stronger statement. So I learned a lot as a filmmaker from them. I think the best part about the Navajo Code Talkers was that halfway through filming, or we were almost at the end of filming, we get a call from PBS, who was the producing partner, the public broadcast system, and they basically told us that a bill had been entertained, and they were going to use some excerpts from what we had filmed to help pass the legislation. They were putting them in little packets of all the senators and congressmen, little 3-minute vignettes. And so and then the bill passed. So we'd like to think that maybe our film helped enact legislation. And the legislation was to grant them their medals finally, because they had never received recognition. None of the Code Talkers in any wars at this point had received recognition. So the bill passed, and President Bush, too, at that time, scheduled a ceremony. And so we get another call from PBS saying, we'll give you additional funding, but you have to film this. This is sort of the end of your story. So we said, okay, great. We call to try to make arrangements, and the White House says, we can't let a private production company in the White House. It's only C-SPAN. And I said, oh, darn, I really, really want to do it. Well, Gail Ann Hurd, I learned a lot from her at this particular juncture. She's the Hollywood producer. She says, let me talk to them. She says, so why can't we film? And they said, well, because you're not one of the approved, entities. She goes, well, what will it take? And they said, that would take an act of Congress. You would have to have a bill authored and legislation passed. So at that point, I'm ready to walk out of the room and go, well, okay. She goes, okay, so how do I do that? And bless her heart, she called everyone she knew, and she got the bill passed in about 4 weeks, and we filmed that ceremony in the rotunda of the White House. So another lesson that I've been telling the kids I've talked to this week is just never take no for an answer, because we thought, boy, authoring legislation and an act of Congress, that sounds pretty daunting. It's not. It was just people at the end of the day. We didn't have any opposition. I think they piggybacked it on some other bill and probably raised your taxes in the process, but no, I'm kidding. So that film, I hope you all can see it at some point. I wanted to bring copies of it. It's sold out, actually, and it's available at pbs.org. It's distributed by PBS. But interestingly enough, 2 years later, I get a call from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And they say, Miss Redhorse, we loved what you did with the Navajo movie, but did you know that we were the first ones and we were the original ones? And I had heard, through our research on World War II, I had heard a little bit of that, but it's very, very hard to find out information about World War I in general, let alone a well-kept secret. So the Choctaw Nation funded part of our next movie, and PBS then picked it up, about the Choctaw Code Talkers. And this is one where I really had to stretch and dig to find archival history, because all of the subjects were dead. There were no survivors from World War I. And most of the families had to go into their archives and really dig through information and old pictures and old journals. But we most recently, last year, came out with the Choctaw Code Talker film. And I did bring you a clip tonight I want to show you because it was an amazing journey. I learned so much about a war that was horrific. Keep in mind, these American Indian men were not recruited like the Navajo to go do code talking. They actually volunteered in 1917 to fight in a war, and they really were not citizens, and they were being treated horribly by the federal government at that time. And they volunteered just to volunteer. And then while they were there as Army sharpshooters, got recruited to sort of in the trenches just create a code and use it, and it actually did help shorten the war. The Germans at that point were breaking all of our codes, and so the Choctaw became heroes, but they were told that they had to keep it a secret because it might be used in the future. And sure enough, they kept the secret, and it was used in World War II. I'm going to show you a trailer we put together before the film was finished. So at the bottom you'll see, I think it says pending release. That's actually inaccurate. It was released last year in a national broadcast on PBS, and I'm actually giving Jen a copy for your university so you can all access it and watch it. So this is the Choctaw Code Talkers. I'm sorry.
Germans were intercepting communications.
The messages were being intercepted and the codes were all being broken.
The Germans had foreknowledge of what was going on.
Choctaw language was language that they could not decode.
The Germans had no idea what they were saying.
They never did break the code. That's what helped win the war.
It's up to us to tell their story.
So it's just a snippet from the film that I'm giving your university, and I encourage you to watch it in your classroom or ask Jen if you can borrow it. It's an amazing story from World War I, and I personally learned a lot about our history, and I think it's important for all of us to understand sort of what went into our freedom and the wars that were fought and just the differences. It was a pretty brutal war, and what our American Indian military personnel and veterans have really contributed to this country is pretty significant. I'm going to switch, because I promised not to keep you here too long. I want to switch quickly now to keep in mind I've given you sort of the journey of my filmmaking, but in '97, while I was starting the film journey, I started the investment bank. And that is sort of a whole nother industry in and of itself, very competitive, very big boys club, Wall Street. It was a difficult journey for a while. It's been many years, and now it takes up a lot of my time in my life, and it's really fulfilling for me because I see so much of the immediate effects when we are able to help with economic development on reservations. 90% of our clients are tribes, where we come in and really help them understand how to raise capital for their projects. A lot of the projects are gaming because that is the one economic engine, as I mentioned, that has really made a difference in our community. But we also help them with other projects and infrastructure. And I think I have to, take a little diversion here and talk a little bit about my husband, Kurt, because he's really helped me more than any other person in being an investment banker. You're a football school. I know you have a good football team. And those of you that have heard me talk about my husband probably know I met him when I was a cheerleader, and he was a football player at UCLA. He was an offensive tackle. My husband is 6'6" and weighs 310. He would be small. He'd probably be a, I don't know, tight end now or something. But he was drafted in the 9th round in 1981 to the Oakland Raiders, the same time Howie Long came in, when the Raiders were good. They had just won the Super Bowl. And he always told me that you can apply athletic principles in business. And for a long time I said, oh, you're crazy, you know. And once again, he was right. I hate to admit how right my husband is often, but I have found through the years that the lessons I've learned from him as a professional athlete, I've applied especially in the investment banking business. And I just want to tell you a little story about Kurt that I think really resonated with me and I hope resonates with you. Being an athlete is not easy. Looks like there's a couple athletes in the room here, and I know it's really hard. And they tell me being an offensive lineman and playing a football game is like getting in 3 car wrecks every game, you know, in terms of the abuse it takes on your body. I used to think, you know, you're just shoving other big guys around, right? And that's not true at all. But Kurt, when he was at UCLA, was a starting offensive tackle. He started all 4 years. But he had to really fight to keep that position. And for those of you that know anything about football, they have what they call double days at the beginning of football season. And you're blessed with cool weather here in Iowa. I don't know what it's like in the summer, but in Southern California, it gets pretty warm in the summer. And double days take place typically in August. And so Kurt would go to double days in August. And what double days means, for those people who don't know anything about football, which that was me at first, is you do a full practice in the morning, you have a break for lunch, and you come back and do a second full practice in the afternoon. Well, most of the players, there was a hill leading up to the dorms, and most of the players after the second practice, after double days were over, would literally drag themselves up the hill and fall into bed until the next day. I'd watch my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he'd come back down after dinner and do additional weight training in the weight room. And most of the starters did that. And I asked him, why on earth would you do that? You don't have to. The coaches don't always see that. They don't know. And he said, Val, you have to be competitive. I have to keep my position. I have to, work extra hard. And he was so dedicated and so passionate about it. And over the years, I've watched him because he's coached. Well, he played in the NFL for 4 years. He played with the Oakland Raiders and the Baltimore Colts when they were back in Baltimore. He's coached all of our kids in their athletic endeavors. All of our kids have been outstanding athletes, and he's coached them in football and basketball. And we often have had a discussion because I know how hard it is. And I said to him, genetically speaking, you're 6'6". I mean, that's something you're born with. None of us are going to just wake up one day and be 6'6". So you had that genetic disposition. I said, but what's more important, the genetic disposition and natural athletic talent, or the hard work, passion, and heart? And he said, there is no question. It's 90% passion, dedication, and what's inside your heart. And I would argue with him because I didn't believe that. I would look at people who I thought had a natural disposition to run fast or jump high or whatever. And he said, no, that's important, obviously, but you can develop those for the most part. The passion and the dedication and that extra heart that you have to make you go the extra mile often can't be taught. And I have found that I have used that more in business than any other single principle. And in starting an investment bank on Wall Street, as the first female native owner of an investment bank, trust me, I had to call upon those principles. I had to work harder. I had to put in longer hours. I would see my male counterparts get jobs and be paid more, and I couldn't worry about it. I couldn't define myself, by other people's standards. I had to just keep my nose to the grindstone and keep working. And in the end, it worked out. And I have had an amazing career as a banker. I recently completed a mandate for the Mescalero Apache. And I overheard someone, did you say your husband is Chiricahua? Well, I'm their financial advisor. The Chiricahua were, relocated into the Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico. They have a beautiful casino called Inn of the Mountain Gods. They're very traditional people. Geronimo and Cochise come from there. heritage and their lineage. They were the only tribe that was kept as prisoners of war for about 36 years. But they reached out to me and called me because they had defaulted on $200 million. They weren't able to pay their bills, just like many people had defaulted on mortgages. But when you have $200 million and you're trying to support an entire nation, they were in a lot of trouble. And they had talked to regular mainstream bulge bracket investment banks who didn't have a real appetite for sort of coming into the tribe and really helping the tribe and looking at the overall footprint of the tribe. And I spent 3 years, and we ended up closing the restructuring of their debt in 2011, and were able to keep their debtors whole and get the tribe more money and bring in new management. And it was a long, long, hard process, but one of the most satisfying things I've ever done, because it really saved their nation and really established long-term economic development for them. It's not as exciting as filmmaking, obviously. It's not, I have no clip to show you, but it's very, very rewarding, and I really appreciate that God has given me that opportunity, which happened really through that chance meeting when I was in film school to go work for Mike Milken. But what the last clip I want to show you before I wrap things up, my real passion, you know, people say, what's the connective tissue here? You do film, you do finance, you have children, you have... the real connection is my faith, and I respect that there might be many faiths represented in the room tonight. I happen to be of the Christian faith, and that really, every waking moment for me is what keeps me going, and the first thing I think about in the morning, and what can I do, and God has called me into ministry, and one of the tribes I work for as an investment banker is the White Earth tribe in northern Minnesota, and I found out one year that 3 elders had frozen to death in little trailers that the BIA had given them, and the trailers weren't weatherproof. They'd come from Arizona, and there was no one to help, and the tribe doesn't have enough money to support everyone, as many tribes don't. I think the idea that gaming is, you know, helping all of our tribes is a real fallacy. It doesn't cover nearly all of our unmet needs. And so in this particular area, elders were freezing to death, and children were going without medical care. It was really like a third world country. And I went to my church, which is Bel Air Presbyterian, and I said, can we start a ministry in northern Minnesota? And they said, Val, you know, we're going to Indonesia and Africa and Egypt, you know, it doesn't, Minnesota, do they really need us? And I convinced them to partner with me. And the first couple of years, my husband and I just wrote the checks cash for the ministry, and thankfully now it's grown to be a little bit more of a national ministry, but we go every year and we try to help out as much as we can. Sometimes I feel like we don't know what we're doing. We're just, you know, it's volunteers, it's people just trying to help out and rolling up our sleeves. And so the last clip I want to show you is from a trip a few years ago, our White Earth ministry. Oh, well, oh, it's good? Okay. My family and I started this ministry about 4 years ago. When I was working with the White Earth tribe and realized that many of their members who live on the Leech Lake Reservation in the Cass Lake District are outside the service area, so they don't receive medical benefits, they don't receive proper appointments for dentists and regular health care, and also their elders who often live in trailer houses and don't have finances to pay for housing or improvements were freezing in the winter and literally freezing to death.
The need is clear. I mean, you know, today we're working on fixing up what was basically a back room that was no longer functional. It was being held up by the siding, not by the beams. The beams were rotten. And here's a couple that's on Social Security. The guy's had 7 heart attacks. They have no other means of doing it.
Is this going to be helpful for you?
Oh, yeah, because every year we freeze out our pipes under there. And we could never afford to do this here. Never.
I didn't realize that back was that bad.
I don't think anyone did. We thought we were just going to put some stuff on the top, and then guess what?
Nice job.
It's really been exciting to see the ministry grow. It started with a little bit of a grassroots effort, my family and my church from Southern California coming up into northern Minnesota. Now we have companies located in the Twin Cities like Klaus Robinson and Sprangers and Associates.
What we're doing is putting windows in, but we've had a problem. We thought they were double hung and there's side sliders. The importance is the windows we took out of here were not insulated windows. They were straight windows. These are insulated windows so that they'll keep the cold out. In this particular area, you know, we can get 30, 40 below, wind chills to 50, 60 below. So 6 months from now, the snow will be, you know, up to here, and it'll be, the windows will be doing what they're supposed to do, is save energy and keep this facility warm for this woman so she can live there.
We hope to see it grow more and more, because every year when we leave so much unmet need, and we wish we had a larger budget and a larger crew to help, especially with the housing and the medical needs.
On behalf of the White Earth Tribe, just thank all of you for your labor of love. I mean, that's what it's about.
Thank you so much, everyone, for volunteering, money, time. We've already been talking shop for next year. A lot more money, hopefully more expertise, but Dave and Kurt are pretty good. I think this year's a perfect starting point for a banner next year. And to be perfectly honest, I think we did a lot of things this year. We did a lot more than we were planning on.
I would just encourage everyone to come up, be a part of this, help people that really need our help in America. And right now we're working with White Earth, which is one of my favorite reservations. They have great people, they have loving people, they have a heart, but they're only one of many. And so the more that we can do, I think we can join together and just create something that is a true answer to prayer and can really help with housing and basic essential needs. Thank you. As I wrap this up, in closing, you know, someone asked me today really what is the through line or the connection between all of the different jobs that I do. And obviously, I've talked about my faith, but I would say if I had to sum it up, it would be about the people and the relationships. And my pastor once said that, you know, when he sits next to people as they're passing on, he's never heard anyone say, boy, I wish I'd worked more in my life. What people usually say is, I wish I'd spent more time with the people I love. And I also got asked this week to talk about some of my favorite movies. And from this year, I really encourage you all, if you haven't watched it, to watch Iron Lady, the Margaret Thatcher story, because it really surprised me in that it was a story about love and relationships and not so much about politics. And I don't want to ruin it, but at the end, when she has to say goodbye to her husband, it resonated with my family, because I think when we look at the journey of our lives, it's about the people. And if I could pass on one piece of advice to the students is embrace the relationships no matter what journey your life takes you on. That's what's important. And the sort of closing thought I want to leave with you, my favorite Bible verse is Isaiah 30:41, and it talks about soaring with wings of eagles. And eagles are very sacred to us in the American Indian community. So I hope that every one of you in the room, whether you're 20 and a sophomore or older and looking at your grandkids' lives ahead of you, that you all soar with wings of eagles. And I thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you. They have mics in the back, so please feel free to ask me any questions. We have a little bit of time. I know that some of you are getting extra credit for your classes, so if you want to get some extra points there, feel free to ask me.
Raise your hand.
So my thing kind of goes on both a personal experience plus a question at the end. I'm a 19-year-old male, 6'5", also pretty tall, working on the 310 part. Hopefully we'll get there one day. But one of the things I've always tried to do is be big on community service and giving back, because I have had a lot of, opportunities that other people have when growing up. Like, I come from an upper middle class family. Like, I don't have to take out loans for college. I always had, the support of getting good grades and everything. But at the same time, I feel some people who don't have the same type of life or rewards, luxuries as I do, don't understand the struggles that people in my situation kind of go through. Like, I'm expected to get good grades. If I was to drop out, I don't know what my mom would say. Like, it's not an option for me. I have to get good grades. I had to go to college. There was no, go to work, anything like that. Like, it's kind of, I guess you could say, a social barrier that I had to overcome. And I realized that, I'm young. I still have a lot to go. I have a lot of good opportunities. I'm in a fraternity. I'm very active. Do a lot of philanthropy stuff, mission trips every summer and everything. And I'll never be able to feel, or I guess understand the whole be turned down for either like a job interview or something like that because of my national descent or heritage or whatever. So one of the things I was wondering is, how can I more or less understand what it's like for people of minority descent or people who are discriminated against? How can I understand what they have to go through, even though I'll never feel it, in a sense, even though I can, go on mission trips and build homes and build churches, and I'm very religious and everything. I'm just wondering, what advice could you give to me to kind of open up that spectrum and at the same time show people the other side of the field that they might not understand?
Great question. Well, a couple things. I think, the first part of your summation is very accurate. I think regardless of what our background is in life, we all have our own challenges and obstacles, and it's a misnomer to think that if you are upper middle class or white or wealthy that you don't have those challenges. I mean, we live near Hollywood, and my daughter went to a wealthy private school and saw more problems with children of Hollywood stars than we've ever seen, almost in even the Indian community. So, I mean, you have to be true to yourself, no matter what your what expectations are put on you. And one of the messages I've given people today that I've learned is, don't compare yourselves to others. You have to honestly define yourself through you and your Creator, even though there's pressures put on you and demands put on you. But in answer to the second part, what I find is there sometimes is a tendency when people come into Native communities or watch Native films or learn about Native people to have this arm's length, to think that if you're not American Indian or you're not part of that tribe, that you have to really stay sort of separate, and so that you're kind of watching from a distance or you're serving from a distance. And I watched my husband, who actually has some closer friends on the reservations than I do, because he's much more social than I am. He goes fishing with the people, and I think it's just immersion. And I know people of all nationalities and all backgrounds that come into the community and are there to really help, and they're there to listen, and they're there to befriend. And the calling that I feel from my faith, the message that I feel from Scripture, is to come in love, and come with a message of hope and warmth, and we're here to serve. We're not here to be dominant. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to serve you. And no matter what color your skin or how tall you are or what your background is, if you come with that attitude, you will be accepted into that community, and you'll become, if not one of the tribal members, obviously, but you'll become a part of that, and you'll understand things, and you'll begin to understand their perspective. Even if you may never experience it personally, you'll start to identify with it. And I've seen that happen with my husband, to the point where my husband is a stronger activist on behalf of Native communities than even I am for some reason. I think he feels it stronger. He feels the injustice more because he feels part of dominant culture. I kind of get involved with tribal politics, and sometimes I understand that there's some blame internally at times too. But you know, he as someone from being a Caucasian male just really feels that pain. But he has to kind of get in there, roll up his sleeves, and really listen and really become a part of the community when he's there. And he's not there all the time. I mean, you can still do it if you're even there for a week. So I really, bless you for wanting to be involved at such a young age and not just having a selfish perspective on what you're going to do for your career and how much money you're going to make. And bless you at this young age for wanting to serve and wanting to help. And I just pray that your life be all that it can be. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Blake.
Hi.
You said that the Navajo people were very like the code talkers were very accepting, that they didn't get any rewards or anything like that. And then you went to, I forgot the name of the other tribe, I'm sorry. What
Choctaw.
Choctaw. And then you said the Choctaw people were also code talkers. Did you notice like a difference in their attitudes towards those, not receiving anything or anything? I mean, we're like the elders that had actually been code talkers, they weren't, grudgeful or anything, but were like the other tribe members resentful at all? And then was the Choctaw just completely different?
That's a great question. The big difference was that the Choctaw code talkers were no longer living. So we interviewed their family members, and so naturally some of the family members were a little more vocal about the injustice because they felt it on behalf of their family members. But they also said if Jim were here or if so-and-so were here, he would never, ever complain. So we found the same sort of dedication to service and the lack of complaining. They were not angry, the men themselves, at least the stories from the families. But on their behalf, just like I had felt some anger and frustration, we did find some of their children or grandchildren who said, it didn't seem fair that he had served and came back and didn't have a penny because he couldn't get his pension or benefits. And we actually talked to the military and said, this doesn't seem right. And the military told us that it was more about lack of information and access because they would have to come from the reservation and go to the whatever the military place was to get their benefits or their medical care. And it just, the communication lacked, that they actually could have probably lobbied for their benefits, but it was sort of an excuse in my opinion. So it was really a sad situation, but I never did feel from any actual military gentlemen who served any anger or frustration on that. They were just happy to be part of the Marines, the Navajo anyway, and said they'd go back and do it all again. When you talk to a screenwriter and a filmmaker, there's thousands of stories that we want to tell. I'm working on 3 films that are in development right now, and funding is always the biggest obstacle. We're hoping to pull the funding together. I think the most exciting one is the Standing Bear story, and Standing Bear was a Ponca chief who was arrested. He had been forcibly removed to Oklahoma from Nebraska, not too far from here, and then his son died on the trail of their Trail of Tears. and he wanted to return to bury his son back on their homeland in Nebraska. And when he got to Omaha, he was arrested for being off the reservation. He asked for a trial under a writ of habeas corpus and under the Human Rights Clause of the Constitution that allowed for that. And in a written document that we still have, he was told that he was not technically a human being as an American Indian, and this was in the late 1800s. And so it is the first case of a human rights trial. He did push with some advocates for the trial. He prevailed. However, the court system said this was not to set a precedent. American Indians were still not human beings. In fact, we didn't gain human being status under the Constitution until, I think, the 30s. So I'm happy to announce that I am a human being now. But as a filmmaker, we find it to be a very important story because it's something that isn't often taught. I never learned about it. I learned about other human rights trials, but not about Standing Bear. And for those of you in the audience that are old enough to remember MASH, the series, B.J. Honeycutt was played by Mike Farrell, and he is producing it, and I'm directing. And we have a very strong production company out of Ireland, of all places, that is the production entity. Again, I don't know, Europe often feels very strong in their feelings about Native Americans, and sometimes champion our rights in ways that are very interesting. So I hope to see that one get funded and filmed soon. We also have a screenplay that was written by a Cherokee woman that we're producing on the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Trail of Tears. And then we just put in for a grant to do the Wilma Mankiller biography, which we hope to get. And we don't know. I mean, it's up for grabs at this point, but we're hoping that we'll be given that opportunity. So those are the 3 films we have in development. There are thousands of stories I would like to see told. I run into people on reservations every day that tell me stories that some of them are just painful and tearjerkers, and some of them are funny, and some of them are military, and I just can't wait to tell them all. Anything else? Oh, a Packer fan.
Okay. I was just curious about how you came up with the soundtrack for Naturally Native, like how you picked the music, because I just thought that was really interesting.
Great question. I had obviously done quite a few films before Naturally Native, not doing every single discipline, but I had been in the business for a while, but I had never put a soundtrack together. We had a blast doing that, and it was amazing because as a director I had certain songs in mind or certain feelings that I wanted to be conveyed with the music, and we just didn't know what kind of reception we were going to get. And every single person we called, from Donna Summer, who had a relationship with the Manchuntucket Pequot tribe, to Gloria Stefan, donated their songs. Now they got some money from the royalties on the soundtrack, which Silver Wave produced and carries, but on the movie itself they charged us $0, and it was amazing to pull the music together. We had drum groups and traditional Native music. Joanne Shenandoah, who's an Iroquois Oneida singer, wrote an original song, and we had country western stars. Pam Tillis donated a song. We had just an amazing group come together, and we play that still. And I just gave Jen a copy of the soundtrack. We got a lot of really positive feedback on it. And I was on Amazon the other day, and Amazon carries the soundtrack. I mean, I'm not in charge of that, but I just found it interesting that it seems to have a longevity. So, great question. Very, very difficult contractual maneuvering. One of my co-producers actually headed that up. But, sound rights and music rights are complicated. You've got the writer of the song, you've got the original recording artist of the song sometimes, and then it's just multi-layers, and you have, the musical houses that all have to get a piece of it, and I think we were trying to divide up $1 each on the soundtrack. It got really crazy, and, people are getting 10 cents over here and 10 cents over there, but nevertheless a great learning experience. Yeah. Yeah, oh, wonderful. Thank you for that. For those of you who didn't hear her, she mentioned the Meskwaki, who are your local tribe, had code talkers in World War II. And we did learn about them as we were doing the Navajo story, and they were part of the awards that were given. As I think there were some Comanche and several others. So the Navajo were not the only ones, obviously, and so you have some local involvement, and it sounded like the Meskwaki gentleman was very instrumental in getting the bill originally authored, and so that's an honor, that came from Iowa. That's excellent. Thank you for that. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I believe there's cake and cookies, and if you want to grab me, thank you.
Before we part here, I just wanted to thank you all for coming and sharing this evening with Val Redhorse. And thank you, Val, for gracing us with your stories, and to all of the financial supporters of this event. Please feel free to dig into brownies and punch and cookies over there. Thank you again.